Hello students, in this video we will understand the concept of user-defined functions. What is a function? A function is a group of statements that together perform a specific task. So in C programs, we use functions to perform a specific operation or a specific task. We can categorize these functions into two categories. Number one is library function and number two is user defined function. Library functions are the functions which are inbuilt functions. That means we need not to define those functions, we just use them. There is a common place called a library where all these library functions are kept. And the C standard library provides various built-in functions like printf, scanf, getch, function to calculate square root of a number, that is sqrt function, par function, various string handling functions like string comparison function, string copy function, etc. And all these functions can be used in our program. So whenever a program calls any function, the control is transferred to the called function like this. So when clear screen function is called, the program control is transferred to this function, and after the execution of this function, the control again goes back to the main program. And when we call another function, control again goes to that function, and after the execution of that function, it comes back to the main program. So by this way, we use these functions in our program. When we call a function, the control is transferred to the called function, and after the execution of that function, the control again goes back to the main program. So now we are using a printf function in our program. So when this printf function is called, the control goes to the definition of this function, and after the execution of this function, control comes back to the main program. And here you see that we are providing an input to this function also, and this function is performing its operation on this input actually. So this new Delhi is the input for this printf function, and this will print this input which is New Delhi on the monitor actually. So this printf takes an input also. And here you see we are calling a clear screen function in this program. So when the execution of clear screen will be there, so it will clear the screen, the statements written on the monitor actually, but this function is not taking any input actually, like in case of printf function. So there is no input for this clear screen function, and there are some functions which takes inputs and which provides also output also, like this par function. This par function takes two inputs, m and n, the value of m and the value of n, and here the value of m is basically copied into variable a, and the value of n is copied into variable b. So actually it will calculate a to the power b and will return its value a to the power b. And since the value of a is equal to m and the value of b is equal to n, so a to the power b will be equal to m to the power n, which is the required output actually. So this par function is basically taking m and n as input and providing m to the power n as output. So this function takes input and provides output also. The same way if you see this sqrt function, so this function again takes an input and provides an output. So we can categorize these functions into three categories: functions without input and without output, functions with input and without output, and function with input and with output also. Just like library functions, we as a user, as a programmer, can define our own functions also. So in C there is a facility so that a programmer can define its own function also, like this. So we can define our own functions also, and these functions are called user defined functions. Just like this, we can use our own functions, we can define our own functions also. We can define a function with or without output, with or without input. In order to make our own function, first we need to declare that function. The same way we declare a variable, we will declare our function also, and after declaring we need to define that also. Since the definition of user defined functions are not available, so we need to define the function also, then only we can use that function in our program. So there will be three components of a user defined function: the declaration of function, the definition of function, and the calling of function, that means use of that function. First we will discuss how we can declare a function. So declaration means we will tell or telling the compiler the name of a function, the input parameters of a function, and the output of the function. So declaration tells compiler that what is the name of function, the types of input it will take, and the type of output it will provide. And if it is not providing any output, then its output type or its return type will be void. So here you can see I am using an example, void print line function. So this function basically is to print the line on monitor. So we can make our own function for this purpose. The name of this function is print line, and here this void is the output type. Since I am saying if there is no output, we can write void there, and this bracket is used to write the type of input actually. Since it does not take any input, so this bracket is blank actually. Here is another example, void prime int. So this function will take an integer as input here, and this function will not give any output. This is why I have written here void actually. This is the third example, void sum int int. This function takes two integers as input, and this will not generate any output. So we can declare a function. The normal syntax is that we will write the type of output. This type of output is also called return type, and then function name will be there, and in round bracket we will write the types of inputs. Like in par function, two integers will be input, so all the inputs, or you can say the type of inputs, will be written separated by comma actually, and here we will write the type of output. So the general syntax of any function declaration is this, and this function declaration is also called prototype declaration, function prototype declaration. Now you see here, suppose I have to declare a function which calculates reverse of a number. So what this function will do? This function will reverse a given number. So it will take an integer as input. So here we will write the type of input actually, and this reverse is the name of function. And what is this int? This int is the return type of this function, that is the type of output actually. So this is return type, this is name of the function, and this is the type of input. By this way we can declare any function which we are going to use in our program. We can understand this with some more examples. Like suppose we have to declare a function which calculates the sum of two integers. So what we need to do, we need to first think the name of this function, and of course we need to find the number of inputs and the type of inputs, and we need to find and we need to know the type of output also. So here we can take the name of function as sum, and of course it will take two integers as input and it will provide an integer as output. So the declaration of function will be this. So here you can see this int is the return type, that means the type of output. This sum is the name of function, and here it takes two integers as input. So I have written here int comma int. Let's take another example. Let's say we want to make a function which calculates addition of two float numbers. Then of course the input will be two float numbers and output will also be a float number. So this will be the declaration of that function. And suppose if we want to make a function which can compute the factorial of a number, then of course this function should take one integer as input and it will give one integer as output. And we can think any name of this function, say fact. So the declaration or the prototype declaration of this function will be int fact int. We can take another example. Suppose we have to compute the average of 5 numbers. That means we want to make a function which calculates the average of 5 integers or 5 numbers. Then we should take 5 integers as input, and if it generates average of 5 numbers, then that output should be float. So this may be the declaration of this function. So it takes 5 integers as input and a float number as output, and the name of function is avg here. We can take another example also, like we have to make a function which can compute a to the power b. So of course the name of this function is power here, and it takes two inputs, the value of a, the value of b, and both of the inputs are of type integer and the output is also an integer. So this is return type and these are the type of inputs, and this POWER is the name of function, though we are having a library function POW for this purpose. We have to suppose make a function in which we have to check whether a given number is prime or not. So of course this function will take an integer as input, the number which we need to check whether it is prime or not, and of course since we are only checking for that number, so it should not give any output. So the output type of this function will be void. So when function does not generate any output, the type of that function is void actually. And now we will discuss the second component of user defined functions, that is function definition. Suppose we want to define a function which calculates the sum of two integers. We can define a function just like we define the main function by placing first the header of the function, then inside curly braces we will write all the instructions of that function. So if we want to define this function, first we will use this header, and you see this header contains first the type of output, that is return type, the name of this function sum, and the type of inputs for this function, and both types are integer here, but in definition we will write the name of these inputs also. So here I am choosing two names m and n. So first integer is m and the second integer is n. You see, when we declare a function, then these names are not required, but while defining a function the names of inputs are required. So in bracket we will write the type of input as well as the name of input. Then inside curly bracket we will define or we will write all the instructions of this function. So what we will do, we will just take an integer s and we will calculate the sum of these m and n, then we can return this value s as output of this function. So this is the definition of this function. And now let's discuss the complete program to add two integers using function. So first we will include all the header files, and after this we will declare this function actually. So this declaration of function includes the return type, that means the type of output, the name of the function, and in round bracket we will write the type of inputs. Then we can define our main function, and in main function we are calling this function sum. So we are calling this function here by passing two integers. That means this function is taking two integers 10 and 20 as input. Then after the completion of, or after the definition of this main function, we will define the sum function. Here is the definition. You can see here we are using the names of these inputs m and n. So when we call this function by passing values 10 and 20, the variable m will receive the value 10 and the variable n will receive the value as 20. And when we calculate the value of s, it will be equal to m plus n, and again since m is equal to 10 and n is equal to 20, so it will be equal to 10 plus 20. And when we use this instruction return s, that means the value of this s will be returned back to the calling function, and this x will receive this value. So x will now be equal to m plus n, that is 30. So here when we print the value of x, 30 will be printed. So by this way we can make our entire program. So this is our complete program. Here you can see the first component is function declaration, which will be there at the top of main function. That means we will declare the function before the main, or you can say before the calling. It is same like we declare a variable before using that variable. The same way we will declare the function before calling this or before using this. And after the calling of function, the control goes to the definition of that function. Then after the execution of that function, control goes back again to the calling function. And since here we are returning a value also, we are returning s actually. So this x will be returned to main, and the value of x will be received in the value of x or by the x. So x will be equal to s actually. Then when we will print the value of x, the 10 plus 20 will be printed. So by this way the entire working is there. This is function declaration, this is function calling, and this is function definition. And here is the same program. We have declared int sum int as a function prototype declaration. Then in main we are calling this function as x is equal to sum 100 comma 20, and here is the definition of this function. So I am taking m and n as input parameters. This will receive the value of first input, that means m will receive the value of first input and n will receive the value of second input. Then the summation of these two numbers m and n will be returned. So when we will run this program, the value of n is basically will be 100 and the value of n will be 20. So 120 should be the answer. Here you can see. And if I take second parameter, let's say 200, then 300 will be printed like this. So we can provide any number here. Say I am using 105, then this output will be 305. So this way we can define a user defined function in our program. We can take these input as variables also. Let's say a comma b, and these values can be taken from user also. So we can ask user to enter these numbers. we can scan those numbers using scanf function like this. We have to use two %d signs, then comma and a comma and b, and in function calling we will pass the name of these variables a comma b actually. So now when we call this function, the user can give the value of a and b, and we will pass these values as the input for this sum function. So here m will receive the value of a and n will receive the value of b actually. So it will give the summation of m plus n actually. So let's run this program. So here we have to give two numbers. Let's say first number is 45 and second number is, let's say, 67, and here is sum 112, which is the summation of 45 and 67. So this way you can see that we can pass the variables also to this function. Now let's make a program which can check whether the given number is prime or not using this function actually. So our function will check that the given number is prime or not. So we will pass an input as integer to this function, and this function will tell whether the given number is prime or not. So we'll take a function which will take an integer as input and which will not give any output. So the return type of this function will be void. In main we will call this function by passing the number x, and this function prime will check whether the number x is prime or not. So in definition we will take a number n which will receive the value of x, and when we will check whether n is prime or not, in fact we will be checking if x is prime or not. So we all know the logic to check the number is prime or not. So we will take a flag value and we will set this value as 0, and if we found that any number I between 2 to n minus 1 can divide this number n, we will set this flag as 1. So we will divide this n by starting from 2 to n minus 1, and we will check if it is divisible by any I or not. So if we will find any I which can divide this n, the flag will be set to 1, and we will use the break so that we can come out of the loop, and after the loop we will check the value of flag. If it is still 0, that means n is prime, otherwise n is not prime, and you know the value of n will be equal to value of x. So when this function will be called, this function will be executed with the value of x, which will be stored now in n. So by this way we can make this program.